Okay, we're not going to keep our guests who joined us early waiting any longer. As people join the call, I will admit them. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Essential Considerations, How Childcare Providers Can Prepare to Operate in a COVID-19 World. Our presenter this morning is Yasmin Maddox. Yasmin is the founder and CEO of Architect. And I would like to thank Yasmin for providing this Child Care Provider Workshop series for us, and to thank our sponsor, Five Star Bank, for giving us the opportunity to assist childcare providers with pivoting and preparing themselves to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Yasmin.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody is doing as well as can be expected these days. I am going to do my best to provide a ton of information, but to keep it light, to keep it snappy, peppy, and to throw in some humor. As my grandmother used to say, and I'm sure everybody's heard the saying in some form or another, oftentimes or sometimes you've got to laugh to keep from crying. And so I'll inject some humor here and there, but this will be chock full of information that is meant to be useful for you on a day-to-day basis. I will provide time at the end of each section for any questions you may have. If you do have an absolutely pressing question that you're like, look, I'm going to blow a gasket, I need to ask it before the end of a section, you know, just indicate that in the chat box, and I will answer it as quickly as possible. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Yasmin Maddox. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Architect. We create web-based professional advancement tools for working parents. We are working with Pathstone today, you know, as the start of this workshop or webinar series rather, because parents, especially working parents, have a vested interest in the sustainability and the overall health and well-being of not only childcare businesses, but more importantly, childcare providers as individuals. As you all know, or if you haven't been told lately, you are critically important to society being able to function. And I think we've seen over the last couple of months that, you know, without a strong infrastructure, which includes childcare providers, society just can't function optimally. So to kick things off, this first webinar is focused on how you can use technology to organize your childcare business in a COVID world, in a COVID-19 world. I am going to go over the basics, and I'll step back for a second. This is brought to you by Architect, Pathstone, and Five Star Bank. I am going to go over the basics in section 1, but here is the agenda. We have 5 sections that we are going to go through. Again, questions are welcome. I will provide answers as I am able to. I am no stranger to saying I don't know. So if there is something that you ask me and you stop me dead in my tracks, I will make sure that I get you the answer via email. So you can rest assured about that. So to start off, section 1, using technology to become more organized. The number one aim here, or the number one bit of information that I want you to take away from this section, is that technology can help you in a number of ways. There are childcare providers who oftentimes I find, both in my personal and professional work, that are not quite fully digitized, to use that term. They are somewhere in the middle between still having a lot of paper records that can be much more effectively organized and having some digital records. As we know, over the last 10 years in healthcare, for instance, digital records are you know, really what society is moving towards for efficiency's sake. But there are arguments to be made for having both. So I'm going to get into that, but principally I'm going to show you, explain to you, be an evangelist for how technology can help you become more organized. So first off, what needs to be organized as a childcare provider? Initially, when this webinar series was conceived of, COVID was not here. And in very quick fashion, it became the most pressing public health concern in over 100 years. So I'm going to go over the three aspects that are critical, whether you're dealing with a public health crisis or not, but then I'm also going to include information regarding COVID-19 operations and public health checklists specifically. That information will be a segue into webinar 2, which will really get into the nuts and bolts of public health considerations, risk management, risk analysis, so you protect not only the children and the families who entrust you with the care of their children, but also you as an individual and as a business owner. So the things that need to be organized as a child care provider include, as far as this webinar is concerned, calendaring, client records, which includes information and data, operations records, which includes information, data, and finances. And then, of course, COVID-19 operations and public health checklists. So the benefits of digital calendaring are numerous, but I'm going to focus on a few, and I'm going to focus on them in the context of stakeholders. So, you know, none of you may have, if you're a small operation, you may not have shareholders. For those of you who maybe franchise, franchisee or franchise owners for large national brands, you know, there may be some interest or talk of shareholders, but everybody has stakeholders. And the stakeholders I'm going to focus on right now are you, because you should be considered as your own stakeholder, your current clients and families that you serve, your prospective clients and the families that are, you know, raising those children, vendors, and then generally speaking, advocates and stakeholders that don't fit into these previously mentioned categories. So as a childcare provider, one of the biggest benefits of digital calendaring is ensuring that not only is your chronological business activity available for quick, efficient review and access for yourself, but for your employees, for anybody who has a need, a purpose to see that information for your business. So that's the first thing. For current clients and families, what I hear of a lot when I'm speaking to working parents that gets a little crazy is sometimes, depending on the size of the operation or the extent to which there are apps that are being used, software being used, even when technology is being used, sometimes it takes a while to figure out what the best platform is, what the best app is. And so you have the dynamic where things aren't meshing well. You may have, you may be using a digital Google Calendar for one thing. You may be using another app for other things, for, kids to check in when they get to your facility, etc. Ultimately, digital calendaring, for instance, using a tool like just Google Calendar is powerful because not only can your clients know when you're operating and when you are not operating very quickly, but they can know what your capacity is to provide childcare based on your schedule and open calendar slots. So while Google Calendar does not do this in a neat way on its own, it is not difficult to add in this functionality. Even if you have your own website, you can do this. And I will say, and a partnering organization that I mentioned at the end can certainly help you be linked up with students at RIT to find software engineers and programming students who can help you with that task. Prospective clients and families. Digital calendaring is powerful because it allows those individuals the same kind of information. So many of the hiccups that we have seen as of late, especially regarding COVID, has been that because people have been essentially, not locked into their homes, but people have been staying at home for the most part, you don't have the luxury of going down to the child care facility and seeing a sign on the door or in the entryway or whatever the situation may be. And so having a digital calendar provides pretty much near immediate or instantaneous access, not only for childcare providers, but for prospective families to see, okay, I don't have, or my current provider doesn't have availability for me for X, Y, and Z reasons. Is there another provider that can fill the void, that can help me? And of course, even though some providers will lose some clients from COVID who, really came to you all on a temporary or an ad hoc basis, ultimately you still have that network there that you have established so that parents know that they can go to you if there is a need and if you have the availability. That is very hard, if not impossible, to do the analog way with papers or with phone calls, especially if you are playing phone tag. So that's something to consider. Vendors. A big issue that has come up, especially that's gotten a lot of attention in the very much preliminary research among the fault line, so to speak, with child care providers and the ways that you all have not been really helped or assisted, is that there hasn't been a fluid or a connected way of meeting with vendors easily, quickly. With a digital calendar, you can do that. You can set aside time. Acuity, for one, is a platform that you can use if you have Squarespace. Calendly is something else that you can use, and I will again provide all of these links within these slides so you can go to them on your own. So ultimately, you want to be able to have the ability to invite vendors to meet with you. Because costs of food, for instance, and other supplies, but certainly food and cleaning supplies have gone up pretty astronomically as a result of the market effects of COVID. It's oftentimes no longer a good idea to, if you can avoid it, go to your local store to get food if you provide food for the children in your care. Wholesale can be much more inexpensive. And I'm not talking just about Amazon, even though Amazon does have a specific section for childcare providers and really early childhood education to get those needs met in terms of supplies. I'm talking about local providers, local wholesale distributors that you can speak to, that you can create relationships with. And the easiest way to do that is digitally at the moment. And then, of course, advocates and stakeholders. So together, you and business service providers like Pathstone, like the RIT Center for Urban Entrepreneurship, like Five Star Bank, et cetera, can plan the best time to meet to address your business needs and strategy. So client records. There are a number of client records and just information that you need to keep close and that you need to keep current. I understand and I appreciate that this is a lot to do, especially as of late, because it does feel like more and more things keep getting added to the plate, and it's because, in fact, they are. And the task here is to help you get these pieces of paperwork together much more efficiently. So for legal paperwork, at a minimum, no matter where you are in your business, whether you have just started, whether you have been going at this for a long time, whether you are part of a multi-state child care enterprise, it doesn't matter. There are certain categories of paperwork, especially legal paperwork, that you always want to be able to access immediately. If somebody were to call you, whether it's an authority from state government or municipal government or not, or if it's a parent, you want to be able to quickly get to these documents. So care agreements, healthcare proxies, medical releases, MARs. If you are authorized to administer medication, you're going to need to have records of that. What policies do you have in place that if I were to walk into your place of business and I said, can I please have your medication policy? I could get it, within a minute or so. Photography releases, videography releases, government assistance program forms. So if you are a part of any programs that provide government assistance, whether in the form of grants, loans, you want to immediately make sure that you have all that information near and dear. Operations records. So what type of business do you have? There are some individuals, especially if you are an in-home provider, who have a DBA, right, of doing business as. But I would strongly encourage you to speak with a partnering organization like Cure or another one to see if you have the right business structure to meet the needs of your business, not only now, but especially because there are added considerations and, to be frank, risks associated with COVID. So in terms of that paperwork, do you have either your DBA paperwork? Do you have your articles of incorporation, your insurance paperwork, etc.? In terms of insurance, I will say this, something that has come up in a lot of conversations that I've had recently, not only preparing for this webinar series, but also just listening to really some of the struggles that childcare providers are having, is that a not so insignificant portion of childcare providers do not have the right type of insurance for their business. A lot of providers are finding out that there are certain riders that they would benefit from having. A lot of childcare providers that I've spoken to, that I've engaged, have found that, you know, they can get more coverage for one area and less coverage for another area, and be in a better financial position than if they are, to use the term, like under leveraged and something happens and they don't have enough coverage. So insurance paperwork is crucial. Your accounts receivable and accounts payable records are also crucial. It's no secret that running a childcare business is a labor of love, but it's also a serious financial labor as well. The economics, the finances, oftentimes get tricky, and that's an understatement. So you want to make sure that you have the best templates, which I will provide, that you can get, so that you keep all of your accounts receivable and payable records tight, to use that term. Training and personnel information and files, you need all of those on record as well. In September, as you probably are all aware, there were changes, at least in New York State, for, I would say, kind of minimum barrier to entry of really having a legitimate childcare business that were related to child safety, background checks, those types of issues. Basically, license regulations that were either added or amended or modified, clarified. You want to have all that information front and center. And then tax returns. Perhaps you have likely, gotten emails from Pathstone or from, just seeing it elsewhere on the web. There's been a lot of information given, much ado, so to speak, about the various federal relief legislation options for loans for businesses, but also there are some loans that are more geared to, and grants that are more geared towards childcare providers. Grants are different, but loans especially, you want to make sure that your tax returns are very easy to find, that there are no hiccups, so to speak, because you don't want to be in a situation where you truly need a certain amount of money and you cannot access it because you do not have your tax returns handy. There is no paperwork that cannot be digitized. I would say, to start off, if cost is a concern in terms of a monthly subscription cost, Google is very reasonable, at least the Google Basic, because it is free. But of course, you have to look at the type of data you have, especially if you have video data, if you use a monitor 24/7 or whatever the case may be in your facility, because you want to make sure oftentimes that you may have a paid plan that is around the amount of $15 to $20 a month, so that you have that extra layer of security to ensure that you don't have any data breaches that can further harm you and your business. So for right now, I am going to just show you this Google Doc. This is available to everybody. I update this on a weekly basis with other information as it becomes needed. But these are templates. These are documents which are useful, helpful. So we've got templates for care agreements, medical forms. We have the forms that are used by New York State in particular. We have MARs, release forms. If you are not already, for instance, a corporation or an LLC, you can go to New York State's, Department of State and get the ball rolling on that. You could find the right daycare insurance. I will say, and this is put at the end with a particular reason, but Five Star Bank really does many great things, including not only banking, personal and business, but insurance and those types of products and related products. So you can go to this Google Doc and find these templates, find this information, and get the ball rolling if you have not already. Financial needs, right? I've already touched upon this a bit, but I think we all know this saying is true, especially as of late. Money often costs too much. For childcare providers, it's been even more difficult to access it because bigger businesses have gotten funds that were really meant for smaller operations that really had the need for them. Before you get to the point where you say, you know what, I need money. I think I need this amount, but I'm not positive. Try to take out as much uncertainty as possible. There are tools, including free tools, that will guide you and actually do the work for you, so you know line item by line item how much money you need, whether that's startup costs, expansion costs, modification costs, I'll call them that, as relevant to COVID. So the provider cost of quality calculator is a tool which is very powerful. It's provided by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and this is the link. We're not going to take too much time, but we do have time to spare. And so I am going to play this video for you. If there are any issues with your ability to hear it, please just note that in the chat. Thank you.
Calculator, which we'll refer to as the PCQC, is a free, publicly accessible, and easy-to-use web-based tool that calculates the cost of quality for a child care center or a child care home. The intent of the PCQC is to help state policymakers and other stakeholders understand the costs associated with delivering high-quality child care. The tool can estimate revenues and expenses at different levels of quality and demonstrate whether there is a gap between the cost of providing quality care and the income or revenue of providing.
Apologies. Let me go back because I had a request to turn up the volume. And I will
Provider cost of quality calculator, which will help policymakers and other stakeholders understand the costs associated with delivering high-quality child care. The tool can estimate revenues and expenses at different levels of quality and demonstrate whether there is a gap between the cost of providing quality care and the income or revenue a provider is able to earn. Knowing the size of that gap at different quality levels can help inform the design of policies, financial incentives, and supports for childcare providers. Over the next few minutes, you'll learn how to access resources to support your use of the PCQC and how to enter data. So let's get started. To access the PCQC, you'll go to the Child Care Technical Assistance Network website and click on the Provider Cost of Quality Calculator link. Once you've entered a username and password, you can begin using the tool. To save time, it's a good idea to use the data collection template to gather all of your state's unique information before you start entering data into the PCQC. You can see that these fields to the right show that, for some elements, default values are included. You can use these default values, which are based on national and state level data, or include data that more accurately represents a provider in your state. We recommend that you read the user guide before entering any data and refer to it frequently. It's accessible here under Resources and includes detailed instructions on using the PCQC. Once you've read the user guide and collected your data, you'll enter provider level data in each of these tabs across the top for a center or a home. You'll notice that there's an expense and revenue statement at the top of every page. As you enter information into the tool, the expense and revenue statement is continuously updated to reflect these changes. You begin by selecting your state or territory and the descriptors for your state or territory's age group categories. You'll then proceed to enter cost drivers for a center, including non-personnel and personnel cost drivers. On the next tab, you'll enter the cost drivers for a home. You can then begin entering the cost and revenue data related to higher levels of quality, including salaries, ratios, group size, and additional cost drivers. Each of these elements can be entered for each level of your state or territory's QRIS. You'll also enter information related to quality level for homes. Next, you'll enter reimbursement rates and tuition rates for homes and centers for each age level and QRIS level. And now you've arrived at the site profile page, the most exciting portion of the tool. At this point, you have just a few more fields to complete, and then you can easily change all of these elements to see how they affect net revenue. For example, the type of care, quality level, number of classrooms, percent of subsidy, and program efficiency. After you've created a scenario for a center or a home at different quality levels, you can create additional scenarios. Instead of starting from scratch, you can select Save As and retitle the scenario. As you create scenarios, you may find it useful to compare the data elements of each scenario. To do this, click on Download Results. You can view or print your scenarios here. This provides a good way to keep track of the data that you've entered for your scenarios. Additional resources on the PCQC are available under the Resources tab, including 2 issue briefs that provide examples of how specific cost drivers impact a provider's net revenue. If you have additional questions, you can email occqualitycenter@icfi.com. We hope that this demonstration has helped you understand how to use the PCQC. You can send feedback from any page of the PCQC, which will help us make future improvements. We hope you'll be in touch.
And there you have it. So hopefully seeing. So next, on to the following section. Organizing data and documents to comply with government COVID-19 directives and guidelines. Before going any further, I will say that comply is a term that I'm using loosely. As you've probably noticed, which has probably added to a lot of confusion as of late, there aren't really any mandates per se, at least not at the federal level. What we have is guidelines. And pretty much what you get is more of the mandates, so to speak, from the state level and from municipal levels. So we'll pretty much keep that in mind to show that from the federal level, there are more guidelines, there's guidance given, there's no real statutory authority in the sense that we all think of to say, okay, well, I need to do X, Y, and Z or else I will be penalized. But at the lower state level, municipal level, that does become a consideration. Okay. What documents and what data? This is key, right? So everybody's trying to figure out, well, what exactly do I need? What should I have? What do I need to do? For one, you want to be familiar with New York's forward safety plan template, which I will click on for you right here. Okay. This is the template that you will need to use to see if you can move forward. Quite honestly, it's a lot less onerous than I thought it would be before it was rolled out. But you can see that there's the space to put your basic information, industry address, etc. This is not specific to childcare providers. This is general to businesses, but as a childcare provider, you know where the differences are. And then you want to start off by pretty much going through this checklist of sorts. So a couple things that I am going to, zero in on right now will be to start from here. People, physical distancing. This is the biggest issue that's come up in speaking to parents in particular. And again, for context, my company really works with working parents, but working parents can't work unless childcare providers have what they need, what you all need. And so the biggest concerns that have come about, and I'm actually going to dig into and provide you with some quotes from parents from a survey that we put out specifically for your benefit. Physical distancing. Now, physical distancing is quite as kept difficult enough for some of us when you're used to being close to people, especially for those of us who are so-called people, certainly you've probably noticed going to your grocery store of choice, whether that's Wegmans, whether that's Aldi's, whether it's Tops or another grocer, that it's easier said than done to keep your distance, especially when most people are used to not being that far away from others. With kids, that issue and that concern is even more pronounced. So things that you want to consider are the following. Yes, if possible, you should be maintaining your distance, ideally 6 feet. But obviously, we all know that while adults may have the so-called authority, right? While we may be the people in charge, kids, especially in childcare environments, run the show for all intents and purposes. And so you do need to consider taking your lead from them. Obviously, you are the ultimate authority, and you are no stranger to this. You will advise the children in your care what they need to do and how they need to do it. And because they trust you, they will do it. But there's a learning curve for everyone. I believe at the beginning of this webinar, before we actually started, one of our attendees said something which was as powerful as it is true. Kids are resilient, which they are. In addition to them being resilient, they also are problem solvers. So even if you find that the distancing issue is still very much a problem in some respects, they will figure it out, and you will figure it out together. So one of the things that I wanted to bring your attention to is, in addition to the fact that you need to maintain your distance, you also need to be aware of how these measures potentially impact the development, so to speak, of these children. For the next webinar, we will have an expert on who really is an expert in design, industrial design, and the angle of really looking to see not what you need or what we need, the government needs kids to do and what we need to do in childcare facilities, but what our goals and expectations are and how they align with our natural behavior and with children's natural behavior. So when you're going through this checklist, you want to be, taking mental notes and also writing in the margins. I would encourage ways of perhaps I'll use the term rebutting what this is telling you to do, okay? And don't say, please don't leave here and say, Yasmin Maddox told me not to do what the state of New York told me to do. That's far from it. But what you want to make sure of, and this goes to de-risking your operations, which we'll get into in the following webinar, you want to see, okay, they're telling me that we need to ensure 6 feet of distance between personnel, et cetera, is maintained. We need to make sure that tightly confined spaces will be occupied by only one individual at a time. All of these things are what we need to do, but let's think about reality and the pushback, right? Not intentional, but just the way things are, the pushback that can create problems. Let me write these notes in the margin so that I can innovate, I can problem solve, okay, I'm going to anticipate this is going to happen. What can I do to mitigate it or eliminate the issue? So when you're going over this, that's the type of design thinking, to use that term, you want to take on. I'm not going to go into all of these. Like I said, I'm going to bring up a couple of the more striking concerns that parents had, and they were concerns that are within the realm of what you can control and outside of the realm of what you can control, but they are still relevant to know. So again, things like establish designated areas for pickups and deliveries, limiting contact to the extent possible. These things are not a far cry from what you as a childcare provider perhaps already are doing, or what you should be doing, just as a matter of good risk management in general. So, no unauthorized people are, or should be on the premises. You know who's there and when and the purpose, things like that. Protective equipment, of course, is something to consider. And before I read the quote from a parent, I will just say that something that came up several times in surveying parents, especially parents of children who are special needs kids who have special needs, is that not all protective equipment, not all masks are made the same. So whereas some individuals are using masks that are, the face shields, the standard still is, the surgical masks, or for kids, the cloth reusable masks. In addition to that, instructors, personnel, et cetera, are wearing those same masks. But something that came up at least a few times for some parents who were raising children with special needs is that for some kids with perhaps, to use the term, developmental needs specific to taking cues, so maybe a child who has autism or another special need, is if they cannot see your mouth moving, it also impacts potentially their ability to really learn effective communication. So these things that are on, this safety plan, you need to follow it as best as you can, right, to meet the requirements of the state. But you also want to anticipate these issues that really aren't easy to spot issues. They really demand that you speak to parents, or at least get feedback from parents in some way, typically anonymously, so both sides feel comfortable sharing information that will help both parties along. So documents and data. Data, okay? Ultimately, it's to inform you and to help you better serve. So questions that should be coming to mind, and hopefully they're not coming to mind at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. Hopefully you're getting some rest. Has anyone, of course, within your operation, whether that's personnel and or children, families, et cetera, contracted COVID-19, right? Who and with whom did they have contact? How many people are we talking? Were they symptomatic? What were their symptoms? How long were they sick? What types of processes were in place to reduce the spread of the disease? So ultimately, these questions are not just questions to float at you, but to really help you, again, to use the term design thinking, to anticipate some of the downstream effects or issues that may come your way. So obviously there are demands upon you. There are expectations, requirements, et cetera, from, county health departments to be forthright about who has contracted the disease, who has the virus, if it is relevant to your business, right? If somebody has contracted it within your business, if you know of somebody who contracted it outside of it, there's bidirectionality, right? There's an effect going both ways. But ultimately, as a matter of intellectual curiosity to help you along, you want to be able to some degree understand what the presentation looks like in the kids in your care, if you find that kids in your care are contracting it. One, it's helpful for your own practice, so that you can innovate best practices, so you can see, okay, well, is a cough here, a cough there, does this child have allergies, things like that, so that you have a full picture, not only regarding COVID-19, but just a better situational awareness, to use that term, of the well-being and the children in your care, and the information that you can glean from that to do better as a child care provider. Now, of course, I'm not going to click on this because I'm going to open it up to questions if anybody has questions. I'll click on it in a moment, but you want to make sure that you have nice and handy the list, especially if you're in New York State, of testing sites, so that you can always either have it on hand or perhaps anticipate that people might not want to ask you if you know where those testing sites are, because people may figure, oh, they think, or they know perhaps that I have it. So you may find that if you have a website, it is a really great way of communicating things that need to be communicated about this disease, which is the risks involved, symptoms, symptom tracker, etc. You can have it as a widget on your website, and if you don't know how to do that, I can help you, or one of my colleagues can help you. So just before I go any further, because I realize that I've been speaking for a while, does anybody have any questions? So moving on to the next slide. Again, documents and data, right? So the hard data, and I'll use the term hard data really to speak of the data that is empirical, that's coming from county health departments, that's coming from the CDC, et cetera. You want to supplement, or better yet, I'll use the term complement, that data with data that is front and center and near to you, which is customer and employee perspectives. The health data means very little to nothing if it is not complemented by getting the real time, if possible, or soon after near time, perspectives of what's going on with your customers, with families, with children, as well as your employees. So pulse surveys are powerful. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg for one of the many apps that provide pulse surveys, which are really just quick surveys that can go out on a timetable of your choosing, so daily, weekly, bi-weekly, etc. You could do a Google form, which is free, and find out what your customers and what your employees are thinking, how they're feeling, and use that information to your benefit, and to help the business better innovate ways of moving through this period. If you would like a questionnaire to do this, feel free to message me and provide your name and email address, and I'll send that to you. So my biggest concern at this time is that my youngest is at an age where he is developing vocabulary speech. During this time in development, it is important for babies to see facial expressions and watch the way words are made. One's mouth, so they can mimic those words and practice word development. If he is around childcare workers for 6 to 8 hours a day who are wearing masks, he will be at a disadvantage in this important time in his development. Wearing masks with clear shields would allow kids to see their caretaker's mouth and facial expression. So again, combing through the survey that we put out, masks, just general, acknowledgement that people should be wearing masks, we expected to see that. But unless you have this experience, unless you are perhaps either raising a child with special needs or just a child who is still very young in their development and their language skills, these things do not necessarily come to mind unless you have that lived experience. And so this is, I would say, powerful information that you should keep in mind. Of course, there are cost considerations. If you are thinking of providing masks to the children in your care, and you're going to include that cost to the cost of monthly or weekly or biweekly tuition, however you do it. But again, this is something to think of, because this is clearly something that parents are thinking about. Whether adults will consistently wear masks, take time off if feeling sick, and limit unnecessary contact with each other and children. So this was another concern that came up, and this is the type of information that, just like my team found, you could find out very easily, very quickly, and at no expense to you, to see, okay, what's on our customers, our clients' minds. Something that isn't mentioned in this quote, but was mentioned elsewhere, is the fact that people are not only scared of the public health consequences of this virus, but they're scared of the financial consequences of it. For people for whom money is a worry, and for most people it is, there has to be a certain level of communication, of transparency, of honesty, to ensure that, if needed, an employee will take time off if they are feeling sick, especially if they feel sick, but they can hide their symptoms, if they are not demonstrably sick. So something to consider, and something that I'll go into quite in depth in terms of risk mitigation in the next webinar, is the fact that there are already concerns and already actions being taken by people to reduce their fevers. Where people are feeling sick, people are having fevers, and because they cannot afford to not go to work, they will take a fever reducer so that they go undetected. So I mention that because, of course, one of the things that a lot of businesses are doing, not only in the childcare industry, but just pretty much virtually all businesses, are these temperature checks, these temporal temperature checks when you get to a facility. I would caution you, and I would just say, situational awareness is key, especially when you want to consider symptoms perhaps other than a fever, is that incentives make people do a number of things. And you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, which is temperature checks, if temperature checks can and have already been easily manipulated. So that is something that you are going to want to consider in the context of who your clients are, what the children are like, what the families are like, the type of rapport that you have with them, and the type of rapport that you have with your employees. Because it's not a matter of whether an employee does it, or whether a child or parent does it, or facilitates it on behalf of the child. It's just a matter of, this is something that is already happening. And so things that you can do in terms of taking this information into consideration is to plan out best practices, to say, again, instead of relying on employees to come to me with their concern that maybe they're sick and maybe they don't want to because they're afraid of not being able to get paid, provide them with a list of resources that they don't need to come to you for, but that they can easily access in a Google Drive folder or a Dropbox folder, so they can access it on their own and do what is not only beneficial to all but ethical as well. Communicate open, honestly, and early, one parent says. The way they currently alert us to instances of communicable disease is very disalarming. They post a sign on the door and a checkbox next to what disease a child in the classroom had or may have exposed others to. I'd like a text alert through an app, just like they do for other announcements. So again, not only do you have matters of communication, honesty, transparency, but also efficiency. So it's far more efficient for all involved to be able to get this information using technology, so that there isn't that burden or that weight on you to constantly think of things. So you can use tools, you can use apps that will nudge people, to use that term. There's actually an AI platform called Nudge, but it'll nudge people to say, hey, is everything good? Are you feeling okay? Et cetera, et cetera. You want that information, the sooner, the better. All right. Section 2. Now the other sections fly. So moving on to section 2, how to stay apprised of regulatory and compliance updates and issues. So the reality of the situation is that finding information on your own, whether it's a ton of information or what you presume to be a little bit of information, is nevertheless a lot of work. It is a full-time job to keep up with the amount of information that is coming out. That was the case before COVID came onto the scene, and it's certainly the case now that it is here, and likely to stay, for a long time, if not forever, regardless of a vaccine. Okay, so how do you minimize, how do you reduce the burden on you to find out the information that you need as a childcare provider? There are a few key ways that I personally recommend, and I personally recommend because I use them both in my professional and personal lives. So Google Alerts. Google Alerts are powerful. You can source news with them, better understand current events and trends in general, but particularly as it concerns you within the childcare industry and relevant industries. You can get regular information on stories and topics that matter to you and your business. So you're not pigeonholed into just finding or getting alerts on, daycares or childcare, et cetera. You could find, or actually rather not find, have information sent to you based on terms such as criminal background checks, childcare regulations, economic outlook. So, in your day-to-day operations, knowing the economic outlook of the country, of your region, or of your area may not seem too exciting or too relevant, but especially in a time like this, when there are a lot more uncertainties now than there were 12 weeks ago, you want to get information as quickly as it comes out, especially if it's going to help you better position yourself financially. So the Google Alerts are meant to work in tandem. They're meant to work along with the calculator that you watched the demo of not too long ago. So for Google Alerts, you can just type in what you want an alert about. So here I have childcare and daycare, and I have it sent to me both to my personal and my work account. It's very easy. Not only can you literally type in whatever it is that you want to find information about, but you can also schedule your delivery time. So do you want it at midday when you're eating your lunch or whatnot? Do you want it first thing in the morning? Do you want it at night? Do you want it multiple times a day? Do you want once a day or once a week? How do you want the information that's relevant to you to get to you? So Google Alerts is incredibly powerful. The National Database of Childcare Licensing Regulations. This is a wonderful tool which is updated incredibly frequently. It's also provided by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So we're talking now a federal agency. And regardless of what state you're in, I'll click on New York. You can get information on the agency name that's responsible for licensing and regulations, their address, their contact information, so their phone number, agency webpage, childcare search page, licensing regulations, as they either have been newly implemented, clarified, or modified. So I think when I was first working on this, which was right before COVID, the most recent regulations that were listed here were from September, which was relevant in terms of the new requirements or the clarification of requirements regarding data, especially data breaches, and the steps to assure your clients, your customers, et cetera, that any data breaches are being dealt with seriously, effectively, and quickly. So that is something, that is a tool that you have at your disposal. So you don't never have to wonder and feel the weight of the world, like, oh, I have to call somebody, or I have to do my own research to figure out what's changed. You can go to this website. You can also, aside from figuring out or better understanding licensing regulations and such, you can go to the National Conference of State Legislatures. Now, this is relevant because before, before getting too deep into this, you want to know as best as possible, and to the degree to which you can, what are budget issues that are of concern and consideration to whatever state you're in. What bills are being proposed? Where in the legislative process are bills? How do those bills impact you as a business owner in general, but then more specifically as a child care provider? What bills are likely to be passed? What bills have already been implemented or in the pipeline, so to speak, that have been implemented, but perhaps they're being implemented or phased, so to speak. So this is another tool, another site. So the National Conference of State Legislatures, just so you have a better context for this, they provide updates and clarifications on legislation, which can be found regarding these particular childcare industry relevant issues. So child fatality, near fatality, child protection in general, child sex trafficking and exploitation, prevention, treatment of abuse and training, reporting child abuse or neglect, shaken baby syndrome prevention. Getting towards the end of these tools, we have the Federal Register. Now, I will tell you, even though I received high marks towards the end of my college career when I was an undergrad, and I excelled in all of my political science classes, which is what I got my bachelor's in. If you asked me if I could remember anything from, I think it was sophomore year of my political science classes, like my intro classes, I could tell you, generally, right? Because it's information that I use on a regular basis. But if you ask me, well, can you name any tool or anything that's amazing? The only one which stuck with me was the Federal Register. Now, if you have never heard of the Federal Register, for many people, it's not very exciting, but for other people, it is very exciting. You can use it to gain an understanding of what relevant bills are up for comment by the public. So not only is the Federal Register a vehicle, a technological vehicle through which you can learn about regulations or whatnot, but you actually have the power to use your voice as it's going through the legislative process to comment on what you think of a certain bill. So that's incredibly powerful because it actually does give you a more direct voice and ability to, affect change potentially than virtually any other avenue absent voting. So the Federal Register is a great site to go to. And you can see, what's up for public inspection. You can look at the current issues. You can type in, as you can see, I have already childcare, daycare, et cetera, to see what's important to you, what bills are going through the legislative process, and have the ability to comment on them, to add your questions and concerns. Okay, so Again, you can review proposed federal rules, regulations, advocate on your behalf and that of your clients. Now, NView, which is a platform created by a company, a startup called Civic Eagle, is what we refer to as CivTech, right? A tech app that is specifically for helping along better governance and empowering people, business owners, citizens, et cetera, to get the information that they need to actually put it into action for good use. So NView by Civic Eagle allows you to learn about and track proposed legislation with summaries of said legislation and relevant data. So to look at the site, the interface looks like this. So right now it's loading. For right now, I will put in, just as an example, childcare, and see what comes up. So I can see this, which it says establishes the child care and early education sector on the Economy Act. I can look at that if it's relevant. I know this morning when I took a look at it, there was something about influenza. So I'll say child care influenza, okay? It's not popping up, so maybe we'll look for COVID. So for instance, this one, and actually, okay. So perhaps this is a better example to use. And you can go down, and what it will do is you can go, line by line of the bill, and then you can get the bill details. So you can get the title, the summary, the sponsors, etc. So if you are so inclined in all of the spare time that you have, and obviously, yes, that's a joke because childcare providers like parents don't have a heck of a lot of spare time, you can at least see who the bill sponsors are. So if you have questions, if you have concerns, you don't have to dig around to see who sponsored it. You could find out very quickly, and if need be, you can contact them. So NView is a powerful tool in that respect. And actually this morning, I was really excited to see that they have done something to help people out. And if I can get to it, they have created this database. And so it's all COVID-19 legislative updates and reopening statuses. So you can subscribe to this, and I will provide the link. You can subscribe to this, and you can get real-time information about what bills have just been proposed, what's been passed, when it was passed, when it's being implemented, what various requirements are being put, or whatever the particulars are. So this is as real time as you can get, and it's a very powerful tool. So that's something that you have at your disposal as well. Organizing COVID-19 operations and public health checklists. So in this section, I am just quickly going to touch on the checklist, and again, kind of do a work through of considerations, questions, to use the term Socratic method of really self-questioning of how each one of us can really think critically about what's being asked of us or what's being asked of you as childcare providers, and then create your own best practices for your internal operations, and also look at external best practices to add on or add to what you're doing. So for operations checklists, Child Aware, which is a national nonprofit organization, concerning best practices and more for childcare, has these two really great tools, these two checklists. One's for center-based care, the other's for family childcare. So we're talking less center-based and more in-home. And just to put it up here so you can see, if you are not familiar with this, if you have not seen this, this is, if it will do us the honor of loading, a checklist that is not admittedly COVID-19 specific, but it is childcare specific. And again, even though COVID-19 is a real public health threat, especially if you or somebody you work with or somebody that you have as a loved one is in a high risk category, this information is relevant for you regardless. So the checklist goes through general questions. So these are questions provided by in the perspective of a parent, right? So you always want to understand the parent perspective, because ultimately they have the final say. They are the final arbiter of whether you stay in business, because they're the ones who will hire you or not. So general questions such as, is the program licensed? Or if it's not licensed, is it exempt for some reason? And knowing what those exemptions are, what they entail. Questions about reliable transportation, check-in and check-out procedures. Then it gets into health and nutrition questions. So pretty much all of these questions, which really is just a pretty robust checklist for you to go through and to answer and make sure, okay, yes, I do this, or yes, we do this, or no, we don't. This is what we need to improve. This is all information that you can do fairly quickly. You can go through it fairly quickly, and then just put it as part of your regular routine, if not on a daily basis, because some of these things aren't applicable for a daily basis, but a weekly basis or a monthly basis, to make sure that you are keeping pace with what you should be doing. So this is one checklist, and it's maybe 8 or 9 pages. This checklist, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through it, but it's roughly the same with a few differences. Now, public health checklists, of course, again, this is a ton of information, but the beauty of these checklists is that the information, for the most part, is aggregated. It's consolidated and put into a much more appealing package than you would be able to do if you had the time to do all of this research. So use it. The New York State site, goes through a number of critically important sections of information. So an overview of the COVID-19 public health, issue or crisis, the symptoms. The one thing I will say about symptoms in a general sense, of course, because I am not a physician, you will be able to ask, the pediatrician questions for the next webinar, is that some of these symptoms, you will, especially trouble breathing, you always want to, again, have that situational awareness. So I will use my own personal story, which is in late March, I felt relatively okay initially, but ultimately after getting a fever and then having some symptoms, and I still thought, I don't think this is anything. I noticed that I had been taking my inhaler, my rescue inhaler, way more than prescribed, and I take it on a PRN as needed basis. And it wasn't until the second or third day that I decided to call my physician, my primary care physician, and say, look, this is what's happening with me. And even though at that time I was not able to get tested because I was managing my breathing, my difficulty breathing, better perhaps than others who do not have a nebulizer and a rescue inhaler. That situation, that experience made me realize that, you may miss things. Even people who have lived with asthma, for instance, for their entire lives, like I have, initially I missed considering that what I was experiencing was perhaps clinically significant, to use that term. So you want to look at all this information being provided to you, including symptoms, but using that not just as, guidance on its own, but guidance in relation to what you already know about the children that you are caring for and the employees that you supervise. Prevention information, masks and face covering guidance, Matilda's Law, which is not relevant for our purposes because Matilda's Law is for older individuals rather than the youngest among us, but still it's important. And they provide other information, which is more akin to mental health resources, because it is a stressful time. And I do imagine that during normal times, it's stressful or can be stressful operating a childcare business. And certainly over the last 2.5, 3 months, it's been a heightened stress. So we have more checklists here, which you will be able to go through, which are checklists really that are relevant to more specific situations. If you're a childcare facility, a school, a youth program, it's a decision tool really to help you with a cost-benefit analysis of what to do, what types of actions to take. And then this is an article by, I believe, University of Utah, I believe, medical health system, about the differences between cleaning and disinfecting specific to toys, because again, a big concern of parents that came about in our survey process was that you don't want to deprive children in your care of the things that make a childhood a childhood, which is the ability to play and to have toys, but you also need to be diligent and vigilant with cleaning, which is removing germs, but also disinfecting, which is cleaning germs. So to that note, next week's webinar will include really a down and dirty, to use that term, look at what products are best suited for use to reduce the risk of the spread or transmission of COVID, but also to protect children as best as possible that aren't as problematic, as toxic. Community resources. Community resources, networking opportunities, and generally speaking, ways we can help as I round out this first in a series of 4 webinars. Pathstone, it goes without saying. Pathstone is wonderful. They provide a ton of assistance, and included in that, of course, technical assistance in education, of which this webinar and the webinar series is a perfect example. Small business loans, float loans, home improvement, which if you are an in-home daycare provider, I would ask Pathstone if that is included, if they can assist, because of course the needs financially, structurally, etc., of in-home care facilities are unique, just as are those of center-based care, and their contact information. RIT, Center for Urban Entrepreneurship, otherwise known as, and affectionately known as Q, or the Q. Q provides small business owners and entrepreneurs with really high impact resources, connections to funders. Pathstone is a perfect example. Pathstone is a partnering organization of RITQ, and they're connected to other service providers, and they provide assistance with crafting business plans, which if you are, if you are seeking out funding, you are most definitely going to want to have your business plan prepared. The program manager there is Sylvia Okoye, and her contact information is provided there, as you can see. The SBA, the U.S. Small Business Administration, is a fantastic and helpful agency. The last few weeks, of course, there have been hiccups, but the beauty of the SBA, if I can be so blunt, is in its individual branches, where you really get the factor of intimate, decentralized communications, networking, resources, and personnel to work with, to provide or to receive counseling, capital, and contracting expertise. And again, the organizations that I'm mentioning to you are partnering organizations. 5 Star Bank, of course, which this series is sponsored by. They provide a number of products and services, investment related services as well. For the purpose of this webinar, at least this first webinar, or perhaps the series, I've focused on banking, so personal and business, as well as insurance. If you have any issues regarding your current insurance, please have them looked at. Please look at them. Please reach out to me, to Passstone, to whomever is best suited to help you navigate that issue, because insurance is always important, but especially now it's critically important. And I think last but least, Promise Venture Studio. So Promise Venture Studio is a nonprofit, which, as they say, attracts, supports, and connects promising entrepreneurial talent, capital, and stakeholders to pave the way for the sustainable growth and impact of social entrepreneurship and early childhood development. So they are a really interesting resource in that they nurture talented early childhood professionals, and they really cultivate the talents of businesses and entrepreneurs who are in the early childhood business, including innovative childcare models. So if that sounds like you, if that sounds like something that you want to do and aspire to, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how can I innovate in some area based on the strengths that I have or that my business has, they are a wonderful resource as well. And they've had really, really interesting and great worthwhile programming as of late too. Additional resources: Facebook for Business. If you're not familiar with Facebook for Business, it is great. It otherwise will sometimes go by the name, or it used to go by the name of Facebook Blueprint. And I think it's still, if you go to facebook.com/blueprint, it will take you to what's now known as Facebook for Business. And, any data issues aside, any issues with Facebook's business in terms of what's gotten press as of late or as the past couple of years aside, if you can go to the site so you can at least get the benefit of digging into the 15 plus years of vast market research data that they have not only at their disposal, but now at your disposal, to better understand not only your current customers and clients, but prospective customers and clients, their behavior as consumers, the types of concerns that they have historically, the types of concerns that they're having right now, so you can better understand where you fit in as not only a priority, but how people are figuring out how to still afford childcare. So it's a wonderful resource for a lot of market research data. Child Aware of America, again, I provided a couple of resources throughout the webinar. The Environmental Protection Agency, which you may think, the EPA, Yasmin, are you serious? But yes, I am serious. The EPA has wonderful resources, and it's often very much underutilized by childcare providers, providing a wealth of information, training, and webinars on topics that are relevant to your businesses, including maintaining healthy and safe environments. So they dig into what we'll be going into next week in great part, which is the types of cleaning and disinfectant products that you want to use in various environments, including those that are primarily used by adults versus those that are primarily used by kids. So it's an often underlooked resource that is quite powerful. Asthma-friendly childcare. This isn't by the state of New York. It's crafted by the Illinois Department of Public Health, but it's a toolkit for better understanding and managing asthma. Depending on where your childcare business is located, especially if you are in an urban center, asthma is a public health crisis in many of our urban cores, in many of our cities. And so again, during this era of COVID, so to speak, understanding the relationship, as scientists are beginning to understand it, is going to be important for you. But absent COVID, it's just good practice to know about the health conditions and issues that likely the children in your care are dealing with. Additional resources, the Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Center, which is part of Department of Health and Human Services, so again, at the federal level. The New York State Division of Child Care Services information for child care providers. You all probably are very familiar with this, or with that site. You know, guide to helping you with accessing general information, training, policies, cost-saving opportunities, and more. One of the things that they do, which is pretty cool, is oops, sorry about that. One of the things that they do, which is cool, is, you know, occasionally they will tell you, you know, that they have a certain number of cribs or of pack and plays. Don't quote me on this because I can never keep straight which one it is, but sleeping accommodations, I'll use that term. So for providers, especially as of late, if money is an issue, which for virtually all of us it is, you always want to be on the lookout for opportunities to get at no charge, at no cost to you, furniture, furnishings. You also have the opportunity to link up with vendors like wholesale providers. Target used to have engagements with childcare providers where they would offload, so to speak, product that either wasn't moving off the shelves, either at a deeply discounted rate, or they would hook up with other nonprofits and provide it at no cost. So those are you know, resources as well. That is it for me. I wanted to make sure that I didn't exceed the time that we had. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. And that is the conclusion of the first webinar in this series.
Thank you, Yasmin. Great job. A lot of information to digest, but very helpful, very useful information. Thanks to everyone who attended today's web. Remember, this is a 4-part series. We will be meeting again next Wednesday and every Wednesday from 11:30 to 1 Eastern Time in the month of June. If you have not yet registered for the other webinars, please remember to do so. And we will be sending out this presentation to everyone who attended today's webinar. Also, at some point, we will make a recording of the webinar available. All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you back here next Wednesday. Yasmin, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been wonderful. Enjoy the day, everybody.